She was a queen in her cradle. Her father died when she was about a week old, so there was no time in her life when she could remember not being a queen. And she was actually the first woman to be a queen in the British Isles, predating both her cousins Mary and Elizabeth. As well as being Queen of Scotland, she was Queen Consort of France, and there were a lot of people who thought she actually ought to be Queen of England as well. So she had a very exalted idea of her own status as a queen. I think the most fascinating thing about her is partly the level of fascination she still exerts after 500 years. People debate furiously as to whether she was very badly treated, a martyr, wrongly accused of murder and adultery, or whether in fact the suggestions, the accusations at the time that she was behind the assassination of her husband so that she could marry her lover. The debate continues to rage. I think she was one of those people who had personal charisma, which is something that you can't put your finger on. You can't see it in the paintings of her because she was said to be, very beautiful. But the paintings, standards of good looks change, but she doesn't seem anything special to modernize. But people talked of her as enchanting and charming and full of grace, and so that she must have had that whole personal aura that very, very occasionally people have, which made people totally devoted to her. There weren't many people who weren't charmed by her, but there were a few, and perhaps because she was used to charming everybody, she thought she could do it all the time, and perhaps didn't pay enough attention to some of the other political skills that she perhaps failed to develop as well as she might have done.
So very early on, at the start of her life, she became queen when she was, 6 days old. And it looked as if she was going to lead a really kind of normal life and go to France and be queen there. And then her husband died, and it all kind of started to go wrong for her.
In some ways, it went wrong almost from the day she was born, because Scotland was a bone of contention between England and France. Both countries were bigger and more powerful, and they both wanted to control Scotland. Scotland and France had been in alliance for 300 years. There were many Scots people who wanted to continue that alliance, and France was really only interested in Scotland to provide a threat to England if England were to invade France. So that was the idea. If England invaded France, then France would pay the Scots to invade England, and that was kind of the deal. But in the 1540s, when Mary was born, England, in the person of Henry VIII, thought that a young female queen was the best opportunity he would ever have to dominate Scotland. And he wanted Mary brought to England and married to his son, Edward. And there were a number of Scots people who thought this was actually a good plan as the Reformation was beginning to unfold in Scotland. But there were an awful lot who preferred the old French alliance. So throughout Mary's childhood, there was an ongoing war. They called it the War of the Rough Wooings. And the south of Scotland was devastated. Edinburgh was burnt. And, there was huge misery. And the upshot was that it was agreed by most of the Scots that Mary would be safer in France. So she was sent there when she was only 5 years old and brought up and married the young king, Francois. But he died young. They'd only been married not even 18 months, I don't think. So after a brief hiatus, which one of her biographers thinks was one of the most damaging things she ever did, not returning to Scotland immediately that she was widowed, suggested that Mary was not actually that interested in Scotland and was far more interested in either being Queen of France or in promoting her claims to the throne of England. But at any rate, she did come back after 18 months and took up rule. But she was only 18, and I think we have to bear in mind that some of the mistakes she made, how many of us would be wiser at the age that she was.
Can you walk me through, for people who aren't familiar with her lineage, where her claim to the English throne comes from and why she started to proclaim herself potentially? And a lot of that was down to her relatives kind of pushing that on her in France, wasn't it? Or can you tell me?
Yeah, it certainly was her father-in-law, Henry II of France, who pushed the claim, because obviously if he had the legitimate Queen of England in his hands, that would open up a whole world of possibilities to him. So the claim came from Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, had various children, amongst whom were Henry VIII of England and Margaret, who married King James IV of Scotland. James IV had, and Margaret Tudor had a son, James V, who married twice, and by his second, Marie of Guise, he had Mary. They had two little boys who very sadly died within a few days of each other, which is obviously heartbreaking for the parents. So therefore, Mary was the great niece of Henry VIII. Now, Henry, as we know, had all sorts of matrimonial escapades, which resulted in 3 children who survived him. He had another illegitimate son who died young. Now, Edward VI was generally reckoned to be a legitimate child and a male, so no contest there about him inheriting the throne. Henry's older daughter, Mary, was viewed by the vast majority of people as legitimate, although Henry had claimed that his marriage to her mother was illegal and that Mary was therefore illegitimate, and she was only permitted to inherit the throne by Act of Parliament. Then Henry's third child, Elizabeth, Catholics thought was illegitimate. So therefore, when Queen Mary of England died, her nearest adult heir was Mary, Queen of Scots.
And she would have been considered, Elizabeth would have been considered illegitimate because when she was born, Catherine of Aragon was still alive, right? That's like the key part that makes her. Okay. So there she is, and didn't she at one point have to actually, or they had her put the coat of arms match England with hers, and she was kind of pushing it for a while there, wasn't she?
Yeah. So what happened when Mary I of England died? Henry II of France immediately proclaimed that his daughter-in-law, Mary Queen of Scots, was Queen of England. And yes, the Royal Arms of England were quartered with Mary's own, and it was engraved on her plate and so forth. And this became a real bone of contention and was probably one of the things, again, that led to much more trouble for Mary in the future. Because when her husband died, and once he had died, Mary stopped overtly claiming the crown of England. So, one can question whether she actually thought that it had been a good idea or whether she really believed that she had those claims at that time. All she ever demanded personally from Elizabeth was that she should be acknowledged as Elizabeth's heir. The very fact that the claim had been made a number of Elizabeth's ministers, who were Protestants, very, very wary of Mary. And there was a treaty that had been agreed between the Scottish lords and the English government in a very complex civil war that was being fought while Mary was still in France. And by this treaty, the Treaty of Edinburgh, they wanted Mary to agree that she was not the rightful Queen of England, and Mary refused to ratify the treaty unless Elizabeth agreed that she was the legitimate heir. So it all got very argumentative, and that remained a bone of contention. But Mary herself was content to be considered the heir, but she did pursue a policy that was very much geared towards that recognition, perhaps to the exclusion of other more sensible policies that she might have pursued.
So there she is in France, her husband dies, she's back in Scotland. And can you just kind of give us the synopsis of what the situation was like that she found herself in Scotland, and then kind of what happened with her personal decisions that
she came back to a Scotland that had, in her absence and during this period that this historian Dr. Wormold thinks was so vital, the Scottish Parliament had passed an act that made Protestantism the official religion of Scotland. Now, Mary herself was a Catholic, and although in her youth she doesn't seem to have been, more than conventionally religious, like most people of the time, she became more interested in religion as she grew older. She agreed with the Protestant lords, who were effectively in control of Scotland, that she would return from France. She wouldn't interfere with Protestants as the Protestantism as the official faith of Scotland, provided she personally could continue her Catholic worship. And that was agreed. And she was true to her word. She never at any time tried to reinstate Catholicism, even though there were plenty of people who would have supported it, both in Scotland and abroad, and every effort to ensure that the Protestant Church flourished in Scotland. So she came back, and her main supporter at that time was her illegitimate half-brother, Lord James Stuart, whom she afterwards made Earl of Murray. Now, he was a very talented politician, Murray, and she was, as I said before, considered attractive and charming, and many people became very infatuated with her as a personality. And she and her half-brother got on well, and all went quite smoothly. She perhaps put more trust in her half-brother than he necessarily merited. She became involved in factional fighting that really, when you stand back, was more for his benefit than for the benefit of the crown. But then, as time passed, she wanted to exert her own authority more, and she also wanted to marry, because she wanted, like every monarch, she needed to leave an heir. And her choice, the difficulties were choosing a right husband without aggravating the Queen of England, because Mary's policy was still her desire to be acknowledged as Elizabeth's heir. But all Elizabeth would do was tell her who she couldn't marry. She wouldn't tell her who she could marry or who the English would approve of. And eventually Mary got tired of this, and she married her cousin, Lord Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, who was another descendant of Henry VII, again, the complicated Tudor Stuart family tree. Now,